Hello, my name is Rachel. As Kyle said, I'm a technical writer for Great Expectations, and we're going to talk today about the incremental update to the documentation that we released recently, which is an update to our Getting Started tutorial, and some of the things that we're working on currently for our next steps. I will go ahead and start sharing screen. Here we go. All right, so I'm sure everyone here has gone through the Getting Started tutorial. It's the first thing all of us are supposed to go through anyway. The update to the tutorial, also where we wanted to start. Most of the content remains the same for those of you who are familiar with it. It'll still guide a new user in setting up their Great Expectations deployment, still uses the New York State taxi data to solve a problem with data validation. The majority of the change in the tutorial is visible here in the overview. And this is where we're introducing the universal map that Don talked about. Previously, our documentation focused on core skills, the premise being that as long as someone was proficient with that core set of skills, they would be proficient with Great Expectations. Unfortunately, this led to some of our documentation being found in less than intuitive locations. So we're addressing this by reorganizing our documentation along the lines of these 4 steps. Going forward, things will be less conceptually laid out and focus more on process. We think this will make it easier for newcomers to Great Expectations and old hands alike to find what they need. So, as Don identified, we found these 4 steps which everyone needs to do in order to operate Great Expectations. First is setup. Can't use Great Expectations if you can't get it installed. Next, connect to data. After all, what is the point of expectations without data for them to apply to? Third, creating your expectations, because there's no way for us to validate data if you don't have expectations to validate against. And finally, validating data, because this is what Great Expectations is for. As we go forward, we're going to be organizing all of our documentation according to these steps. It's not in the table of contents yet. It's coming in a future guide or a future update, but eventually you'll have those steps outlined at the top level. Setup, connect to data, create expectations, and validate data. In order to find what you need to know how to do at any given step, just identify which step you're in and head to the documentation for that. Now, back to our tutorial update. A lot of it is focused on getting the new users familiar with this roadmap and the icons that we use to identify each step. Like I said, most of the rest of the content is going to be the same as what you've seen before. In each step in the tutorial, we will clearly illustrate which of the 4 steps the user is currently in by highlighting that particular icon in this map above. This is something that we're going to include in most of our documentation. And in places where you are addressing something that is used in more than one step, we'll have more than one step highlighted. In our connect to data, as you can see, we've moved on to step 2. The only real change content-wise here is that previously, it wasn't uncommon for the tutorial to present a block of command line interactions, followed by something along the lines of, now let's go back and explain what you've done. Well, we've now broken those blocks up into individual steps so that it's really easy to see exactly what you are doing currently, and it gets explained as soon as you've done it. This is particularly clear in step 3, create expectations, where we've not only broken up the command line interface, but we've also included snapshots of the individual cells in the Jupyter notebook that a user will be looking at. This way, we can guarantee that a new user following the tutorial will know exactly what they should expect to see as they're following along. Again, the rest of the tutorial's content is very similar to what it was before. We're still demonstrating the same principles as it did after all. The last thing that we've changed in the tutorial is to add a review step. In this step, we go through each of the steps that had been performed in the tutorial. We state what was accomplished, and we provide definitions for the technical terms that were used just to help people remember them and be familiar with them. The last part going forward is where we talk about the changes that are going to be made in the documentation so that people know where to look to find the updates that they are, or to find the explanations and the documentation that they need. This part is going to evolve as we are doing updates to the table of contents. Currently, it's very bare bones because the only update we've put through so far is the Getting Started tutorial. That said, we are going to keep making adjustments, as I said, grouping things according to these steps. This is going to be particularly noticeable in our how-to guides. Currently, they're all in one folder. We're going to split them up so that how-to guides that are specific to a step are located under that step in the top level. Each step is also going to have an overview page that will go through the basics of what that step entails, with links to the specific how-to guides for various operating systems, source data systems, and so forth. I'm not going to demonstrate that part right now because it's mostly organizational. Instead, what I'm going to show is something that we're really excited about working on, and that is, and let me switch to my local source version of our documentation since this hasn't come out yet, a glossary. As we're performing our updates to the documentation, we're going to compile a list of every technical term we use, and we're going to define it here. While this alone won't be helpful, well, it will be helpful, it doesn't quite replace our core concepts section, which is where all of these were dropped before. What we're going to do to address that is everything in this glossary is going to get a section here under technical terms, where we will have an in-depth explanation of the technical term in question. So using data source as an example, each technical term is going to include an at-a-glance map that shows which steps, through highlighting, you'll be expected to be using this object in. We'll have the definition of the object, its key features, and what it interacts with. That's basically an overview of the object in this top section. When we go into the rest, we get into the specifics. With each step of the way that you are using this object, we will explain exactly how it is used. With each feature, we'll have more in-depth explanations about it. And at the end, we will have more in-depth explanations about how it interacts with things and how you interact with it. Now, this might not seem too impressive because there's going to potentially be a lot of context switching. For instance, we're talking about a data source, and right here we say a data source functions by bringing together a way of interacting with data, an execution engine, with a way of accessing that data, a data connector. Now, if you're going to have to jump to the glossary of terms in order to find out what an execution engine or a data connector is, or if you're going to click through a link to get to a more detailed description, you might be concerned that you'll lose your place in these documents, which is why we get back to what I said about linking the glossary of terms into our docs. Each of these now, all of our technical terms, the first time they show up on a page after we've done these updates, it will include hover text that you will be able to get this flat definition of for any object or for any technical term you encounter. We'll only do this link the first time it's on the page in order to not flood everything with links, but you'll easily be able to reference that definition. And if you want more explanations, you'll be able to click in to get to the in-depth page equivalent to this. So that is the forthcoming updates for our documentation. We are eventually going to have all of our documentation receive this treatment for technical terms. It is going to ensure that brief definitions and in-depth explanations are available for any term you come across, no matter where in the documentation you are. You're not going to have to sift around to find out exactly what a data asset is. And if you need a more in-depth explanation on how to configure one, you'll be able to just click through. I can say that as a technical writer and a documentation geek, I, for one, am really excited for that update, and I hope you've enjoyed this preview. That's all that I have, unless there are any questions.
Nice. I love those hovers for the terms. So great.
I'm very excited about that. All of the technical terms are stored now in a JSON file so that no matter where in the documentation it is, all we have to do is add a tag to it in order to get the hover and the link in place. And the definition will always be the same no matter what page you're on because it references that JSON document.
Ooh. Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, everyone keep an eye out for these updates, and as always, we're looking for feedback on these things. So yeah, let us know what you think. Check out that getting started tutorial that's out there now, and I guess keep an eye out for the new updates that we're all excited about.